I have what you can call a duplicitous reason for making this show. On the one hand, I want to tell you about Heroes of Might and Magic 4, its place in history, what it was, what it represented. On the other hand, I want to infect you with my affection for this game. Yes, some would point to this game as the one that ruined the Heroes of Might and Magic series, the one that just was horrible, the one that tainted the legacy, the one that cannot even hope to compare to the glory that was Heroes of Might and Magic 3, the one that stunk badly. Well, you know, since then we have had Might and Magic 6, you know, the one that shipped without down screens. They patched them later, but it wasn't a good game. And 7, from what I've been told, tried, but didn't come out so good. And that's pretty much how I could describe Heroes of Might and Magic 4 as well. They tried, it didn't come out so good. And reasons are aplenty. But first, let's talk a bit about the Might and Magic series. Oh, it stretches for decades. It's as old as, well, not as time itself. It actually came out a while after the Wizardry series, the one that really kind of defined what a first-person dungeon crawling RPG was. Well, not even dungeon crawling, I mean, Wizardry did have more than just dungeon crawling. But Might and Magic had its own flair, had its own sensibilities, had its own thing. And eventually that thing transformed into a game called King's Bounty, about which I did a show a while ago. Well, I did a show about the reboot and mentioned the original as well, which later transformed into Heroes of Might and Magic, a tactical turn-based game with a strategic overland component where you would collect creatures, improve your castle, collect resources, and go on to battle diverse monsters in the role of a hero and various other enemy heroes. This then evolved into my favorite game of the series, Heroes of Might and Magic 2. Made a show about it about this time last year actually, as is tradition, and then came Heroes of Might and Magic 3, the one that everybody will say is the best one ever made. I do not disagree with them, it is a superb game. I just don't like it as much as all the other ones, two of the other ones. I just felt it doesn't have the same kind of charm. Bits of it do, like bits of it I love. As a whole, I don't know, it never drew me in as much as 2, or even as 4. Heroes of Might and Magic 4 came at a difficult time for New World Computing, mostly because they were a subsidiary of the 3DO company, a company that was good to them. I mean, they helped publish games like Might and Magic 6, a superb RPG, but well, 3DO didn't really do well on the market. They had one of the first, and I mean the first, true MMORPGs out there, Meridian 59. Did not take off, like, at all. It also failed at that whole making a console thing, you know, the 3DO console. And it continued to fail up until 2003 when 3DO went bankrupt. But most people at New World Computing were fired actually in April of 2002, which coincidentally is around the time that Heroes of Might and Magic 4 came out. In Europe, it actually came out pretty much now, 15 years ago. And you could tell by the way that the game is shipped that maybe it didn't actually have probably the best development cycle possible. Things that felt unfinished, things that felt incomplete, but you kind of got okay, some things don't work properly from the get-go, but they'll make expansions and they can fix this. They've done this with Heroes 3 superbly. Heroes 4 did get 2 expansions. One of them looked like an expansion, at least in theory. I mean, it had a single-player campaign that wasn't horrible, and the last one I believe may have been made by the janitorial staff on their lunch break, because it was the kind of expansion that would have been laughed off even today in the era where people see Call of Duty's $15 map packs as being laughable. This actually kind of puts the intro of Heroes of Might and Magic 4 into perspective, because the first words in that intro are, "To all things comes an end." It's like they knew we're done for, this is the end, there is no hope for us, but maybe the series will live on, which is why it ends with, "And to all things comes a beginning." That beginning being manifested as Ubisoft and their decisions. So many decisions. But let's get back to the game at hand. So what was the gist with this? Well, up until this moment in history, Heroes of Might and Magic 2 was a completely 2D game. It looked 2D, had a certain aesthetic. All the first two did. The third one had a more imported from CGI sprites, but still 2D aesthetic. Heroes of Might and Magic 4 changed that. It made it a bit more 3D. It put perspective on it. And while I would say that the environments and the overworld map actually looked fantastic, and I mean it looked like a fantastical realm, not just an undersaturated, kind of darkish, boring version of fantasy, it did have negative consequences on the way the characters looked in the combat. Because for the most part you saw units from behind and it just didn't feel right. It didn't feel as well. It wasn't side to side, and also it didn't have hexes anymore. You had squares, but lots of tiny little squares. It sort of really didn't affect the way it worked on it. Well, it did. Then now counterattacks were instant, and yeah, the combat was different. The combat behaved differently. It flowed differently. But more importantly, you could actually use your hero this time in combat. Your hero could die in combat. You could lose your hero. You could resurrect him though, but you could lose him. You could also level him up, hire another one, level that one up too, use two of them in the same combat arena, the same combat encounter. Actually, if you leveled up a lot of them, you could just have a party of heroes. You could play Might and Magic in Heroes of Might and Magic. It was the most meta thing possible, and a lot of people didn't like it. Personally, I wasn't really all that affected by the decision, me being part of those people that didn't go insane and send death threats when they wanted to add a technological faction to Heroes of Might and Magic 3. I have made this comparison before, I believe, but look at Age of Wonders 3. It has flame tanks. You could have had a Heroes game with flame tanks too, just saying. And the whole aspect of the way Heroes work now was, well, in essence, was completely different. On the downside, they were all alike. Well, not all alike, but all in the same class were alike. You had a bunch of classes depending on your faction. You would have the spellcaster, you would have the fighter. Well, unless you were a barbarian, then you didn't have a spellcaster. And they were all alike. Every Haven fighter was the same as every other Haven fighter. Doesn't matter what their name was, doesn't matter what their portrait was, they all had the same abilities and the same in-game model. Especially in combat, that was a bit annoying. I'll get to why later on. But they had, without a doubt, the best progression that Heroes of Might and Magic ever had. You'd choose your skills from a random selection, again like in every other good Heroes of Might and Magic game, and depending on what you choose, you would sometimes not have just a plain old fighter anymore. No. You focused on combat and scouting. Well, you are now a ranger. You gained the +5 to your ranged attack. Well, I believe the armies too. You focused on chaos magic and nobility. Well, now you are a witch king. Every time you hit someone, you strike fear into the heart of your enemies. You focused on life and balance, or now you're a monk, and chaos cannot thwart you. You could be a ninja. You could be an actual ninja if you focus on necromancy and scouting. And with every choice, you shaped that character to something that may be a surprise to even you if it was the first time you went about that path. It was an experience of discovery that I can only equate to learning how to play Heroes of Might and Magic 2. I wish that this method of progression was implemented in every other game, a Heroes game at least. It just felt natural. You were what you knew how to do, what you learned how to do. Now, sure, some of the classes weren't all that great, but the concept was flawless. The implementation could have worked better. Implementation could have worked better on everything, like the spells, for example. The spells in this game came each with their own quote, a short little quote that just sold them. It sold them completely. It made you think, oh my god, why doesn't every game have a quote like that? It just doesn't. It doesn't tell you what the spell does. It tells you in the context of the world something about that spell. For example, here's the description of Firebolt. Set your enemies on fire, light a campfire, or roast a duck. It's an all-purpose spell. Or, the knights spent the full day preparing for their attack, praying, casting spells, and polishing their armor. Pointless. But at least they died in shiny armor. That's the description of cancellation, which removes all buffs from a target. Or raise skeletons. Otherwise, the bones would go to waste, wouldn't they? See, it makes these spells seem like something more than, oh, this does 2 damage, yeah, I'm gonna pick that. No, it gives them feeling. Now sure, again, they were balanced about as well as Magic ever was in Might and Magic. Horribly, some of them were useless, some of them were overpowered, but they just felt right. You kind of started thinking to yourself that, this seems more like a world. Like, is there a reason for a pack of wolves to guard a mine? Well, no, there isn't. And so this game had the ability to set guards, like enemy guards, to move around, to patrol. So yeah, you could imagine that there was a pack of wolves around the area, but you could go in there when they weren't right in front of the mine and take it, or they could come after you took the mine and eat you. Now again, mobile guards wasn't something that was superbly received at the time, but I liked it and I was glad to see it reborn in King's Bounty. It made for a fun addition to the game, a fun way to interact with the map. Things I wasn't too keen on were, well, the way the towns were handled, or at least the way some bits of the towns were handled. Namely, the unit creation part. You would have not as many types of units per town as in Heroes of Might and Magic 3. Though in some ways I'm glad, because at some point Heroes 3 got a bit insane. I mean, you had Azure Dragons, you had Rust Dragons, you had Crystal Dragons. What was next? Snot Dragons? Yes, I know I've made a joke before. Flame Dragons? Asbestos Dragons? Though I do believe actually that was in World of Xen. As enemies, yeah, they would be fun to fight against in Might and Magic, but as actual units that you have to take into account when you're building your army, it made it a bit too much. So cutting down on the number of units, yeah, I was okay with that. You had the ability to choose one higher level building that you would build in favor of another one, which would mean that you only had access to one creature of a certain level. For example, you wouldn't have both genies and nagas, or you couldn't have devils and bone dragons being produced in the same town. And the bit that actually kind of pissed me off was that creatures wouldn't grow weekly anymore, they would grow daily. So you wouldn't have Week of the Gopher, Week of the Wolf, when wolves started appearing everywhere on the map. You just have slow growth day after day, and that really made it boring. It took out the fun of actually time progressing. It made it feel less... Well, it was the opposite of adding the quotes in the spells. It did the opposite. It took away from the world, which was a shame. You could also now build caravans to transport units you would recruit normally from a building outside your town to your town, which is something every other game implemented because it was a good idea. You could also practically send creatures out to fight on their own without a hero. They weren't as effective. I mean, you didn't have the hero's bonuses or the spells, but hey, you could. I would guess that would about cover the important gameplay changes in Heroes of Might and Magic 4. Some people like them, some people didn't. They weren't all good, they weren't well balanced. I believe there have been a few attempts by fans to patch in some things, but this wasn't what you would call a friendly game when it came to modding. But in spite of the flaws, I really like it. And you want to know why? I'm getting now to the part where I tell you why. This game had, without a doubt, some of the best storytelling in the Might and Magic franchise. Some of the deepest characters and the most engaging narratives, and they were mostly delivered through text. Cinematics, oh boy, they did not have any. It had an intro and yeah, that's about it. It had an intro. Again, no budget to do anything more. It was just delivered through text, and some of the campaigns were astonishing. And it all began with the premise that Enroth was no more. The world was destroyed. It was torn asunder, decimated. Well, not decimated. It was annihilated when the Sword of Frost and Armageddon's blade clashed. It destroyed the world, and everybody that could left. They went through magic portals to Axia, to a new world, to begin anew. And yet, old evils came with them. And by old evils, I mean people. People being the root of the problem. You don't have stories about that. You would have a story about a glassblower's apprentice, an orphan. Well, everybody's an orphan now because the world blew up. Called Amelia Nighthaven, who had black hair, but her model had blonde hair. This is the part I was annoyed about when it came to the models in combat and in general, who bungled her way through forming a new kingdom where people wouldn't be afraid anymore of being ravaged by the nearest barbarian tribe. But along the way, she encountered something else. Someone with a plan to make sure that such an atrocity to destroy the world would not happen again. He was Gavin Magnus, the leader of the Wizards of Brocada, back from Enroth. He wanted this world to be protected. He wanted this world to be saved from such a fate, because let's face it, people are a problem, so we're gonna do it again. So he envisioned a plan to mind control everyone into submission, into eliminating free will. Now the game set him up to sort of seem a bit unhinged. I mean, he did somehow mysteriously not die when the world exploded, but it also sort of highlighted that he may have a point in certain ways. You had the story of the legacy of the Griffin Heart name. I won't go into spoilers, but it's a nice story. You had a bunch of them, some of them maybe not as great, but by far my favorite, and without a doubt, well, in my opinion, the greatest story in Might and Magic period is the story of Galdot the Half-Dead, an orphan raised by a necromancer who saved him from being cattle for a vampire, who tries to save his life when the destruction comes by miscasting a spell and becoming a half-zombie, half-human monstrosity. One that's not accepted by anyone in this world and lives like an animal, like a literal animal. He's basically like Golem, but with the IQ of Machiavelli. And the voice acting, the deliveries, the lines he has in the mission briefings, they're pretty much spot on. Like they sell the character superbly. And what does he want to do? Well, initially he just wants to kill some chickens and eat them, but he's caught and they torture him, they beat him, they want to set him on fire on the stake, they want to kill him brutally. He escapes, and then he kinda becomes a villain, and you get to play as him being a villain on his quest for bloody revenge and the forging of a new necromantic empire, one in which everyone is welcome. I wouldn't call him an anti-hero, no, he's an anti-villain. He's evil, like to the bone. He knows he's evil, he absolutely understands what he's doing, but he's not an asshole about it. He was such a fun character, and it kind of pains you because during his campaign things happen that you may have wanted to see represented in more ways than just text. Maybe having extra characters, maybe a cinematic, maybe something more, maybe something that can bring this fantastic story to life even more. Okay, I'm not gonna go into spoilers about what he does and why he does it. I'm just gonna say that he is the best character in the Might and Magic franchise. Not in the sense that the most powerful, not in the sense that the one that achieved the most, but best written, most interesting, most compelling, the one that is sort of like Walter White in a certain sense. Only he does even more things. A great many things, actually. Heck, you could probably just read the story because you can find it online. It's text, it's a couple of pages of text, and it's a great story. And that's honestly one of the reasons that I keep coming back to this game, that and the music. Yeah, some say it's a bit repetitive, but I love it. It's based on really, really old, I believe it's Irish or Celtic or something. It's an old melody that's shown up in a bunch of other games. It was even in Stronghold, it was in, I believe maybe Warlords Battlecry 2. It's a variation on a very old song, and it permeates the game. It's a superb theme, it's beautiful. The main menu was crap, but again, every main looks are crap compared to Heroes of Might and Magic 2 one. I hope you give this game a try. Give it a chance. It's a divisive title for sure, but oh my god, the stories. I kind of wish they were better implemented and represented through the gameplay, not just through text, but they're great. But most of all, this game is truly apart because it tried something new. It tried maybe too many things new, but it tried them. Heroes of Might and Magic 3 was an enhanced version of Heroes of Might and Magic 2, who itself was an enhanced version of Heroes of Might and Magic 1. Heroes of Might and Magic 4 was a new game. In every way it was a new game. For better and for worse, it brought new ideas that were really needed. Sadly, it wasn't completed as it should have been and never will be. As for Axioth, well, I highly doubt that Ubisoft is gonna give up its World of Warcraft ripoff to go back to when Heroes was actually good. If you wanna play Heroes of Might and Magic 4, you can find it right now on GOG for the price of about $10 or €9.50. Or you can buy the entire series, well not the entire series but from 1 to 5 for around 43 euros. There should probably be a link in the description, and hey, if you click on it and buy it, we do get a small percentage of that due to our affiliation with GOG. Oh, and if you're around on Saturday evening, I would say at around 6 p.m. UTC time, that being the, universal time coordinate thing, I'm gonna try and do a live stream of Heroes of Might and Magic 2 on Twitch. Just search Unacom on Twitch and you'll find me. Why? Well, it's tradition. I used to do it a long time ago. I stopped, but as the intro says, and to all things comes a beginning.